Okay. So guys, if you remember from yesterday's class, we talked about what? We talked about public folder, source folder, the boilerplate, how to create a new React application using a package called create React app. So today I'm gonna redo that again. So I'm just gonna go ahead and create a new project, React project, and then we'll take it from there. Okay, guys? Okay, let's get started. So I would use the same create React app package. Okay, so create React app package. Let's create a folder for just for this purpose.
Vikram, have started recording? Just quick heads up.
Yeah, I've started recording. We are on the record.
Okay.
Cool. So I'll just create my first React app, just a folder. Then I'm getting into the folder. Okay, then I'm use my package create React app, and then I would create my first React application, and my name of my project is Supercart. Okay, it's just Supercart. It's a very simple application name. We're going forward, we will use this application to add more features, functionalities, and all that stuff. Cool. So let's get started. As soon as I hit the red enter button, the package should kick off its creation process, taking in taking in my project name as a Supercart. And once your application is up and running and once your application is done with your installation, all you have to do is start a little server which is already installed on your machine, say npm start. Now, Manoj, do you remember what is the first file that you have to take a look when you are put into a project? You know, tomorrow you get a React project. What is the first file you start looking at?
Package.json.
Exactly. So let's go get into our application. CD Supercart is my application. And the way I just open up it in my browser, in my IDE, and that should bring up my node modules, which you're pretty much familiar with, my public folder, which has all the client side, okay, the code that is always encrypted. Then just give me a minute. Okay, let's get started. Now we talked about the source folder. Source folder is your first, this is where your source files always kept here. By default, you would have index.js, which is your root file of your application. Okay, and this is where React starts. You have, let me give you an example. You have a canvas. Okay, you have a canvas, and I ask Arjun, go draw something on the canvas. Okay, and there are like few columns or few boxes on the canvas. Now Arjun would ask me, hey Vikram, you told me to draw something. In which box do you want me to draw? I would tell him, hey, go draw it in a particular box, maybe third box or fourth box. The same way, I would create a template, the HTML template, and the React job is done. But React has to know where it has to put this template onto the HTML canvas. Now, the React DOM is a GPS guy. He tells it gets the data from the React, which is the HTML template, and go finds a box that has something called root in it. Now, whatever you give root in here, you have to specify the same root inside your HTML document right in here. Okay, this is how React goes and adds the view here. This is the place for the React. Okay, now let's go back to the index file, and you have something called, then you have a file called app.js. We'll talk about all of these things. We talked about React DOM, a simple CSS file to write our styles. And then we had our React DOM and asking the React DOM, hey, go get my React component and add it to this guy, which is my HTML. Cool. Now I'll go back to app.js. I'll clear off all of this stuff in here. And before that, let me start my application and see if everything is good. So in order to start my application, I simply have to say npm start. How do I know I have to use an npm start? if if you are into a project, the only way you know how to start a project is go back to your package.json, and there are a bunch of scripts in here. Those scripts would help you to start your project, build your project, test your project, and all other stuff. In my case, I just have to do npm start. So npm start, and that should bring up my application, throw it into a browser, and here we are. Cool. So this is a boilerplate. This is a very basic template provided by the Facebook using a create React app, from where we will start developing our application. Any questions until this far? As we did in here, every company will have their own template to get started with. And those templates will be used across the teams to develop different projects, different applications. And every team will have their own custom code which belongs to their own project, but behind the scenes, they all own the same template. All the template all the projects follows the same template guidelines in most of the cases. Okay, now let's go back to our app.js. This is the first file that actually is loaded onto our index.js using, I'm importing it and then using it. Cool. I'll go to app.js. Let's get started writing our first React component. Any React component, I keep telling this component. We'll get to a point where you really understand what a component means. So the first thing I need in any JavaScript file is to require a React component, sir, right? I mean, require the React package, because I have a package called React and I have to require that package. So where React is my box, and I just require the React package. This is a ES5 way of requiring a package, but ES6 has a better syntax, like a plain English syntax. Import React from React. As simple as that. I'm using a keyword called import, my variable name. So I'm getting this package imported into this guy, this variable. So this package is held by this variable or this box. When I say var, I'm just creating a package. I'm creating a box and I'm putting the React package into that box. The same thing with the ES6 syntax. Let me write it down here, ES5, and this is ES6. Cool. And the next thing I would need is, remember we used a template, and then on top of the template, we start writing our code. The same way, React has a base component. All the fancy magic happens that in the component. All we have to do is get the component and extend it. I mean, add our changes to that component. So we get a component, the way we got a template, and then started adding the changes. So we'll get a base component and we'll start adding the changes onto that base component. So this is how the syntax goes. Class, okay, and then I would say my name of my component, which is always starts with a capital case. Always remember that. App, which is the name of my file in here. I can literally give anything that starts with a capital case. Class name extends. What does it extend? It extends the React base class, the React base component. And my component is React dot component. And inside this component, I'm using a curly brace in here. This is a class component, okay, because I'm using a class keyword to create my component, and inside which I have a function called render, okay. Remember, every React component must and should have a render method. We'll get on to see what are the other methods. Render is a function, okay. It's a plain JavaScript function. And what does that function return? Whatever is returned by that function is what you see on the UI. So I would return a simple h1 tag. This is hello world to React. Okay, and then I would simply export my class. Export, okay, default, export my app. Okay, this is how I simply create a very very basic React component. Oops, did I say export default? Awesome. As simple as that. Now I give it a run and see what does it show on my UI. Now remember, I'm using a React functions to create a h1 HTML tag. I'm using React to create HTML. React is nothing but it's just the JavaScript library to create HTML. And the interview question is, what is a React? React is a JavaScript library to create user interfaces or HTML. Give it a save, go back to your UI, and you should see. So right click, inspect, and Manoj, what does this, which tag is this?
HTML React.
No, what tag is it? You have multiple tags in HTML, right? What tag is this?
H1 tag.
H1 tag, right?
Yeah.
Because I'm returning a H1 tag. What if I return a P tag?
It will become paragraph tag.
It becomes a paragraph tag. As simple as that. So I'm just using React to create my HTML. As simple as that. I'm using my React to create my HTML. Cool. Now let's do something very interesting. Until this point, guys, we were trying to hard code the values. Oops, I'm just removing all the commented things, but that should bring up. I'll bring up that later, or I'll share the resources where you can see those comments again. Now, until this point, guys, we were trying to hard code the values into my P1 or H1 tag. I'm just trying to change back this H1 tag again. I'm hard coding my values. I'm hard coding the string. Right, I'm just hard coding the string. Now I'll just create a variable. I'll have my data inside variable and then listen the variable inside my HTML tag. Okay, so what I do is I create person. If you are very familiar with the person object, name, Manoj. Okay, Manoj. How do I access the person's name?
Person.name.
Person.name, Arjun, exactly. So I go here, replace this guy with person.name. Now what does my UI show?
Manoj.
Manoj, okay. How many of you think it will show Manoj? Say yes. Manoj, do you think it shows Manoj, right? You say yes, and nobody else thinks that it shows Manoj. Then what does it show? Vivek? Vivek, are you with me?
Yeah, bro. What's up?
Okay. What does my UI show if I give it a refresh?
Manoj.
Manoj. Okay, so I'm saving it and see what happens.
Oh, that's a H1 tag. Yeah.
Okay, so guys, am I supposed to not get the person.name? It's supposed to be Manoj, but why is it showing directly in my whatever is inside my H1 tag? Because that's not a
Translated.
variable. That's not a variable.
It's
In
taking
order
as a
to,
string.
I'm sorry.
It is taking as a string. Right?
I'm sorry.
It is taking as a string, right?
Exactly. It's just taking as a string, the literal string it's taking it and rendering it. In order to make a string inside a view, a variable, in order to use a variable inside a view, always use a curly brace. That's all. And save.
Mhm.
Interesting. Just use a curly brace, and if you have your editor set up for JavaScript, you should see a change of color. It's white in here. As soon as I go ahead and add curly brace, and you should able to see a different color. That's showing that it's no longer a string, it's a variable. Okay, now I'll go back and change this to something color is equal to red. Okay, and instead of this guy here, I would say color. Okay, and that should say red instead of Manoj. Now let's see what happens if I have to do something like this. Color is equal to violet. Now, Hannah, what does my color show on the UI?
Can you repeat that?
So if I refresh my page, what does my color show on the UI? What is the string that you can see on the UI? Right now it shows red, right? So I have red in here.
Mm-hmm.
H1.
If either of you can mute and continue from one laptop just talking. I created a variable called color red, and then I changed it to violet, and I'm using the same variable.
It will
show
take
it on my,
whichever the latest color is.
it's supposed to take whichever is the latest. In my case, which is violet is my latest,
Violet.
right? Cool. Any questions until here? How to use a variable inside a view?
Yeah.
Any questions here?
Bro, can you repeat it once again?
Okay, cool. Let's just go this. Manoj, are you good until this far? This is
Yeah.
This is React. You're hard coding it, right, Manoj?
Yeah.
You're hard coding your code into your HTML template, but you need to pass the data. I mean, you want to use a variable. Okay. Now let's say I have a multiple h1 tags. So let's do this. Okay, so if I change this guy, Manoj, see how many times I'm using a h1 tag.
Yeah.
And I'm hard coding the data. But if I have to change from red to violet, what am I supposed to do? I can go ahead and change everything, right? I have to change this to everything to violet.
Okay.
But instead, if I use a variable, something like this. So color. So now what does my UI show if I change that to color?
It should show color.
It should show color.
Color.
Why not violet?
Because you haven't assigned any
brackets.
Exactly. I'm not using any curly brace. So if I do this, use the curly brace and then copy this, and you should see violet. And anytime I change at one location, it should change the entire other locations because I'm using a variable. Variable is something that changes.
Yeah.
It's not the literal string value. It's a variable that holds the data. Another piece of data apart from what is shown on the in here. It's not the color, but when it's compiled, it auto assigns to blue.
Blue.
Okay, sounds good.
Yeah.
Okay, cool. Now this is blue. Now so let's say let's say I would say something like this. This is red. Okay, so I say this is red. Even I want to show if my color is red, I want to show this is red. If my color is blue, I want to show this is blue. How do I do that?
You need to write if or else condition.
Exactly. So go ahead And after the render function, I say if parenthesis color double equal to red, a string, and curly brace. And then what I do is I return what? If the color is red, I return red. Else, which is here, else I would return this is blue. So walk with me. If the color is red, I return this view. Okay, this is a view. Everything inside the return is a view. If the color is anything other than red, I would simply return this div or this view. Okay, and I gave it a save. And Arjun, what it's supposed to show?
What if
Yeah.
to
This is blue.
This is blue, obviously, because your color is not red. Hannah, you had a question?
Okay.
What if?
Her question is, what if there are more than two?
changes or like yeah.
Like
If else, if else.
this one?
Yeah.
So what do you want me to do? If the color is violet, and I can
So
go
it will go
add
to else.
another leaf, right? If the color is, in my case, is blue, then I do this, and then I would add another else and return this is blue. So what is it? This is violet. And run. Did that answer your question, Hannah?
Yeah.
And you keep chaining it. Sounds good?
Okay.
Okay, cool. Now, guys, I'll show you a very simple example of JavaScript and see what do you think about it. I write a function, say hello. Okay, and then I simply console log, I would say hello, and I will call this function. What does my UI show? Oh, I'm sorry, what does my console show? I run this function, Hannah?
Not sure.
Okay, so a function is nothing but a piece of code that you can call multiple times by simply calling that function. So you use, this is the name of the function, and this is what the function does, and this is how you call the function. So if I say hello in here, it should say hello, right? If I do the same thing multiple times,
Oh.
it should say hello and how many number of times I'm calling this function, right, guys? Now see what happens. Hannah, now tell me what does it do now?
Should say hello.
Does it say
I
hello or
think it
hello?
said this.
Does it say hello or does it say this?
This.
Oh, it
No.
says both. Hello.
You just call this function, right? Say hello.
I'm sorry.
Okay. Yeah.
Because I'm calling the function, and the function
Okay.
has two things to do.
Okay. I got you.
Okay, so let's see what happens. Then this. Now, what should happen?
Is.
It should call all the three
three.
console logs.
Yeah.
Hello, this.
It should call all the three console logs, and the same thing goes again. Right? Now let's see what happens if I add some, a return statement in here. I just say return. Now let's say, Arjun, do you have any clue on what happens now?
Return statement. Okay.
I'm sorry.
It will print only first three.
Exactly, Arjun. It only executes the first three.
After return, it comes out of the function and it won't print the next
Yes,
line comes out of it. Yeah.
return is the termination of the function. After return, no single line of code is executed, and this is called dead code. Even if you start writing your code and many of the IDs are configured that, you will have a little pop-up saying this code is unreachable. You would never reach that code. Anytime in a function you encounter a return call, this any line after the return call is like a dead code. It's never executed. Okay, now let's go back and apply the same principle in our UI. What I do is I'm trying to do is if I'm writing a piece of code in here and returning it, right? And if this piece of code is good, now let's go back to and only have red and blue in here. Okay, so let's go back in here and remove all the complicated if else and just have only if else. So if the color is red, it start executing in here. Does it go to else case at all? If my condition color is red, it will go to this line, it will go to return, and it will stop executing in here. Anytime a function encounters return in its flow, it will terminate there and then. Make sense? So you go to return and it breaks. So in here, you no longer return an else case in here. If the function is not executed here, by default, it goes to return. Okay, so what I do is I simply clear the return else case completely and have the return case directly out of our else case, if case. So the flow of the function is if it goes to red, it will encounter return and it will go no further, right? But if the color is not red, it will totally skip this part. And if there's no else condition to go by default, else it will try looking for a return until it finds a return, it will keep executing it. And the next return is found here. And this would exactly work the same way as previously if else. So if you see a code base where people use if, but they do not use a else case, it's completely okay. Okay, do not panic and search for else case. It's okay because your return is the end of the function call. Is that clear, folks? Any questions here? Use your panel, say yes, no, repeat.
Repeat one more time.
Okay, Arjun, this is purely JavaScript. Okay? It's nothing to do with React. It's purely JavaScript. Think
I
about
missed something.
Yeah, think about this. You have a JavaScript function, very plain JavaScript function. Let's do this. Say hello, and I will pass a let's pass a variable called red in here, okay? And I would say color, and if my color double equal to red, I would console log this is red, okay?
Right.
And immediately after console
It
log,
won't go to into else. No.
yeah, it would now I would add something in here else, and I do a console login.
Oh, instead of else, you're writing a else block out of that.
Exactly, this is not red. So when you do this red,
Yeah.
and if I have anything other than red, this is not red, okay? But think about this. If I remove the else case, now what does it do? It goes to if I do red in here, the color is red, it will execute the console log, okay, and it will continue going until it finds a return. No, right? In my case, there are two messages. This is red and this is not red because it's continuing it. But what I do is, as soon as my color is found red, I simply say return.
Okay.
Okay, and then you should see that it terminates there and then. I do not need an else case. I'm
Okay.
just breaking the function wherever the function has been satisfied. I don't want the execution to go further, or it will never take the execution further. A function, a return is like a dead end.
Yeah, clear.
Okay, anybody else? One liner, return ends the function, one liner. And if I put the return in the first line in here, it will end there and then. It will not even go to the color red. And I don't see anything on my UI. It's like a stop board. Stop executing right here without no further. Okay, guys? Let's go. Let's move forward.
JavaScript is clear, but when you're doing it here in the VS Code, it's very confusing.
When I do it in a VS Code, it's confusing. Do you want me to change the background color of VS Code?
No, it's not about background.
No, sometimes it matters. You know, the background color. I cannot really code on a white background. Few developers are very...
What I'm saying is here, when you explain it on the VS Code on JavaScript, it's very clear, but sorry, in this JavaScript, it's clear, but when you explain it on the VS Code, it was confusing. That's what I'm saying.
I understand. Just replace the console log, which is consoling to window, to this guy, the view, which is thrown on the browser. Just replace that.
Okay, so whenever we need to terminate a function, we just need to write return from there.
Exactly, and then that terminates the function.
That's the only function which return does, right?
Yes. Once the function return encounters the return, it terminates.
Terminates the rest of the code, whichever
Exactly.
is going
Yeah,
on. Okay.
it terminates the rest of the code.
Yeah.
So look at this. If the color is red, it enters this loop and it terminates. It will never go further. Okay. But if the color is not red, it will go further and it will encounter a return in here. But what I'm trying to tell you is that I don't need an extra else loop in here. I really do not need that, because if the color is not red, however, it's gonna go next because it never encountered a return function. So what I do is I remove the return and I'll make the function go however long it has to go until it finds a return. We will get into the similar example when we are trying to do, we'll try building an application, and one of the use case will touch base on this, and this is called conditional rendering. Okay, I'll give you another example. Let's say is user online, okay, and I say true. If user is online, okay, what I do is remove this guy. When if is user online double equal to true, then I would return something like this. Div, I would put in a class name in here. Online class, and say little h1, the user is online. Okay, instead of putting a class in here, I will write the inline style. So you better understand, style is equal to, I would say, background color the user is available, I'd say green. And then if the user is not available, else, in any case, if the user is false or user is not available, I would return background color to be red. Okay, if the user is online, which is true in this case, I would return online. If the user is not online, I would say user is offline. I'm using a conditional rendering. Depending on a variable, I'm returning either this or this. Does it make sense now? If the product is available, I'll enable the button. If the product is not available, I'll disable the button. If the product is available, I'll show this is available. If the product is not available, I'll say the product is not available. And this is very important in building UI, because it's not always a straight case. You would have multiple different cases, and depending on each use case, you have to render the UI. Does this example make any sense to you guys? You want another example to go with?
Bro, what if there is no return?
What if there is no return? That's a very good question, Vivek. If there is no return, your component will fail. It will expect at least one return function, because React is a component, right? It has to show something or the other. It's a view library. It has to show something or the other. Let's see what happens if there is no return. And see, your render method should have a return statement. It failed there and then, asking your render should have at least one return. So I go ahead and return. Okay, I just say return. I'm not returning anything to the browser. The browser is expecting me to return something, but I'm not returning anything. And you see what happens. Nothing was returned from the render. This usually means your return statement is missing, or rendered nothing, or return null. We need to provide, or we need to show something on the UI, because that is all about React. Okay, guys, you at least have to return a null statement, which is like a blank page, or you can at least define, show an empty div, at least. Does that answer your question, Vivek? Awesome. Now let's move forward. Let's say, instead of getting this guy out, I would create another component called wall. Okay, my very simple component called wall, and a wall in here, and then I would return a simple div with a simple h1 tag. This is wall, and save it, and you should say this is wall. Now, a tricky question. How many of you like biology? Vivek likes biology. Manoj, Hana, Vivek. Okay, Arjun, you don't like biology? Oh, a lot of folks like biology. I do not. I hate biology for some reason, because there are so many complicated diagrams in there. I'm a very bad, what should I say? I don't know. I cannot really draw anything. I cannot even draw a straight line, for your information. Okay. So pretty much everybody knows what a frog life cycle is. Right?
Mhm.
Let me bring up a picture. That should refresh your memory from your primary school.
I think if you take butterfly, it will be more easy.
Oh, you want to take a butterfly? Yeah, cool. Let's do that. I haven't. Okay. Butterfly life cycle, right? Cool. Yeah, this one is good. somebody join in now? Karthik? Hey, Karthik?
Hey, hi. Sorry I'm late.
You're right on spot, man. Okay, so guys, life cycle. This is a very simple life cycle, plain English language, biology terms. You have, this is how eggs develop into caterpillar, larvae, and I don't know how do I pronounce this word in here. Pupa, is that word? Does it say behind the image? Yeah, and then might be this is, okay. I thought this was a caterpillar. No, I thought this was a caterpillar. Okay. So you get the idea, right? You have eggs, then that becomes a butterfly, and that becomes some thing, a word that I cannot pronounce, and then what becomes a butterfly, and then butterfly lays eggs, and the cycle continues. Simple, right? Simple, right, folks? And if you take the same thing into React world, you have something called React Lifecycle. Okay, don't worry about all this.
Your voice is breaking.
My voice is breaking. Let me put on my headset. Just give me a minute. So even in React world, you have a React component lifecycle. Like every component undergoes 3 phases, folks. During the period of its life cycle, like how a larva, butterfly, eggs, this is how a transition happens. You have a mounting phase. You create a component, okay, and throw it on the browser. That's called mounting. And then once it's on the browser, you start changing the things on the browser. That's called updating. Once you're done with your component, you clean up your component, and that's called unmounting. Okay, we have 3 phases in a component of React: mounting or initialization. I'm using a word called initialization, mounting, updating, okay, which is the second phase of the component, and the third is unmounting, which is the destruction. If I can put this in Indian mythology, you have Brahma, Vishnu, Maheshwara, right? Brahma creates the world, Vishnu takes care of the world, and Shiva destroys the world. The 3 different phases. The same, try to align that with a component lifecycle, component of React: creation, updating, and destruction. 3 different phases. Now we'll see the first phase, which is called initialization phase. Okay, so let's begin our show on the initialization phase. Remember, every component in React needs to have render function. Okay, every component must and should have render function, no matter if it doesn't have other functions. Now each function is called a component life cycle. Now render is one of the component life cycles, must and should have a component life cycle. But before render, there are a couple of other life cycles or functions, and after render, they have a couple of other functions. Okay, folks, I'll try to give a real world example of this. And I copied this example from one of the Medium post guy. I do not recollect the name of this person, but the credit goes to that guy. Okay, if a kid is preparing to give a show on the stage, okay, he has to undergo 3 phases, guys. He has to prepare himself. He has to, get the costumes, makeup, properties that are needed for the dance and all that stuff. This is the initialization. And once he's on the stage, he gives the performance, which is the render, because you're seeing the things on the stage. And this is what you see on the browser. And once he's done with the performance, he comes off the stage, removes the costumes, takes off his makeup, hand off his properties and all the steps. And this is unstaging, called unmounting. Is that clear what a component lifecycle is? Now we'll get in detail of each of these component life cycles, okay? The first phase of React component is initialization phase, and the first method or the function that is called on the component lifecycle is a constructor. Now this is not very specific to React, it's a JavaScript keyword, and this is how when you have a class, you construct it methods and you use a constructor, and this is the first component lifecycle, and you say constructor, okay, and then what I do is I would create my color in here, color var color is equal to red, okay, and then I use this is color, so I do a curly brace in here, this is a wall, and my color is, I'm using a variable name in here, and give it a save. Okay, now see what is happening in here. It says must call super constructor in derived class before accessing this or returning from derived constructor. Always remember, when you're trying to call a this is again all JavaScript, it's nothing to do with React, it's just one of the component life cycles in React. When you do a constructor, you need to call super. Now this is goes back to JavaScript prototypal chain and inheritance and all that stuff, which is much deeper topic to discuss. But in a nutshell, this is just a component lifecycle of React. Okay, this is how you define the first component lifecycle of React. I give it a save. This is a wall. My color is red. Now see what happens when I do this. Inside my constructor, I change my color. And I change my color to violet. Okay. Now, as per my previous, previous discussions, if you change something before your render function, it should show up on my UI, right? Now, Hana, you tell me, if I take this constructor out and put it after the render function, what does my UI show?
I think it will still show red.
Hana, can you use your Manoj mic and see?
Oh, sorry.
Okay, cool. Hana, you say, is it still shows violet?
Yeah, it should take one.
Do you have a reason?
Because you have
assign the color with violet. Because this is the latest one which you have created.
This is, but after the render function, again I'm changing it. So they should say red or violet.
It should say violet.
It should say violet because render is called first, and then I'm changing it. Arjun?
The constructor itself won't call, right? When you have written, it comes out of it.
Right. Karthik?
That will be still red.
Will be still red. Arjun says it's still red. Karthik and Vivek, yeah, with me?
Constructor will execute first,
Exactly.
and then later everything.
Okay. And how about Karthik? I think Karthik has muted. I'm not sure. Okay. So guys, Arjun, you were right. The return will stop executing going it further, but it always stop executing within the function. It will never go out of the function. This is the function, and the return only stops that particular function. It has nothing to do with going beyond the scope of that function. Okay. And Vivek, exactly, you are right. No matter which order your functions are, the React guy, that React fancy guy always takes one after the other. It always calls the constructor first, then calls the render function. So if I give it a save, no matter which part of the UI, which part of the component I have a component lifecycle, they're always called in an order. Okay, so I go back and put that constructor back into its location. Now this is the first component lifecycle. Okay, now I'll create another component lifecycle. Now the constructor is where the kid, you know, the guy who is the kid who is ready to give a performance is getting ready. You know, he gathered his properties, he put on his makeup, he put on his costume and all that stuff. He's the constructor guy. Now another component lifecycle called component, plain English, will mount. Okay, and you're telling it, hey, listen, the component is about to mount it, and I give the color violet to blue in here, and see what happens. My component color, the color of the wall is changed to blue because it called the constructor, then it called the component will mount, then it called the render. No matter I shuffle this component life cycles anywhere inside my component, they are always called in an order. Okay, and this, so if I put back here again, this is the component lifecycle where the kid is getting ready. Okay, but he's not on the stage yet. The component will mount is the guy is behind the stage. He's done with his preparations, but he's not he's not right in front of the audience, but right behind the curtain. The curtain is not opened yet, and the guy is ready to dance or ready to give the performance. This is a component will mount, because and the guy is not visible yet, but render is where the kid has started performing and the audience can actually see the guy. Okay, see the kid. Now this is where the UI is shown. Now after the render, you have another component lifecycle. If you see how the way it's going, plain English, you're constructing a component, you're letting the component saying, hey, component will mount, future tense, it's not done yet, future tense, okay, component will mount, and then you're saying render, okay, I'm done rendering. And then what you say is, after the render, you say will mount is future, did mount, component did mount is after the mount. Now let's see what happens if I change my color to green and save. I haven't saved yet. Now you guys tell me, Karthik, are you still there? Oh
Yeah, I'm here.
okay, cool. Karthik, what's okay? Vivek, do you have a question or do you want to say?
Question, bro.
You have a question?
Yeah.
Okay, go ahead.
So this component will mount and component did mount, are they the default functions?
Exactly, yes, or they are the default functions built into the React component. If you do anything apart from changing the name of the lifecycle, that would never work. That becomes another custom function or user defined function. These are the default functions React use out of the box, and naming them, it's the only way you can let the React call them in an order. For your trick, let's say if your color is blue in here, right? If I do something like this, go ahead and change the name of the color, and it would still be violet because this component lifecycle is, I defined it, but it's never part of the React. But if I do component will mount, it will be defined.
So when would we use this? Give me a second.
Sure. Others, do you have any questions on the 4 different component life cycles? And this is on the initialization phase. So kid is getting ready, kid is getting started, is preparing his songs and dance moves and all that stuff. Kid is behind the stage, yet not visible to the audience. Render is where the kid is visible to the audience. Component did mount is where kid got off the stage. Now, Manoj, if I give it a save, what should I see on the UI?
Green.
Yeah, green. Okay, so how many of you think it's green? I'm clearing off the poll. Use the poll and say how many of you think it's green. Okay, Manoj, do you think green? Say yes if you think so. Arjun, Hana. Everybody thinks it's green. That's interesting. But let's see, give it a save and see what's happening. Oh, look what happens. My color is still blue. There's something wrong in here. What's wrong? Let me tell you what's wrong here. My React component lifecycle is going this way. It's going to the constructor, all good. ComponentWillMount, it's changing this to blue. Render function, it also it's just showing, it's not changing anything. It's showing it again in here. At this point, my view is available on the browser, right? I can see the view on the browser. Then I have a ComponentDidMount. After looking at the browser, after the view has been loaded onto the browser, and then I've started changing the things. Now at this point, the render function is not called again. In order to update the view, I have to call the render function again. You see what I'm saying? So constructor, ComponentWillMount, and the render function. Render function shows the view on the browser. Now this is done. Everything is good on the UI. So after ComponentDidMount, my color has been changed, but my UI has not updated. You see what I'm saying? I'm trying to update the data, but the view is still not updating. My view is out of sync with the data. So what am I supposed to do? I have to go back the ComponentDidMount and tell, hey React, you know what? I changed my color. Go back and re-render the UI. So I have to make sure that I call the render function again. So if I put a console statements in here, let's see. Okay, so let's see console.log. This is constructor. This is called. Okay, I use a little this guy. So in order to make it filtered on my console window, then I use this one here saying this is my ComponentWillMount. Okay, then I copy this. I do go here. I do render. Okay, then I do copy this, and then I ComponentDidMount and give it a refresh. And then I filter my screen for this guys and see how the way they are called. The constructor is called first, the ComponentWillMount is called second, the render is called third, and the ComponentDidMount is called at the last, where my data is changed, but my UI has to be updated, and the only way I can update my UI is calling the render function again. Right, folks? And this is where I introduce you something called state in React. So let me comment this guys out here. So I have to make sure, I have to create a variable that is sensitive to the UI, that is sensitive to my view. The view should always start listening to my variable. Whenever the variable is updated, my view has to be updated. Okay, folks, whenever my data is updated, my variable is updated, my UI has to be updated. And if you are little familiar with Angular or other frameworks, this was the main problem. This was the main problem that we are coming up with frameworks. You have your data, you have your view has to be up to date with your data. It never should be out of sync. And that was a problems every framework was trying to resolve. And this would be the interview question, guys. If HTML, CSS, JavaScript was good enough, why are there so many frameworks? Okay, and your answer should go something in between these lines. browser, there is a gap between when JavaScript updates your views and your views would go out of sync with the data. Now, each framework was trying to solve this problem in a different approach. Now, React is solving this problem in a different way. Angular is solving this problem in a different way. The Angular guys, what they did was they tied up your view, which is this guy here, with the data. Okay, and what they do is whenever your data is changed, your view is changed, and whenever your view is changed, your data is changed. And this is where they call it two-way data binding. This is another interview question. What is the difference between an Angular and a React? React does unidirectional data binding or unidirectional data flow, where Angular does two-way data binding. We'll see what a unidirectional data flow is. Okay. Now, in order to make this variable, can I continue this class for another 30 minutes at least before we complete a few basics here? Does anybody have any other commitments?
I'm okay to continue.
Okay. Rest others? Guys, you there?
Yeah, bro.
Okay, so let's go. So this was the main problem. Your data was up to date, your view was not up to date. Okay, so Angular came up with a philosophy saying, hey, we can solve this problem much better. And the React guys came in and said, hey, you know what, we got a better fancy crazy way of doing this updation, and we call them a virtual DOM concept. Well, we'll discuss later. And then this, so thus my variable has to be sensitive, or it has to be very sensitive. Anytime a change happens in this variable, my render function should be auto triggered, because whenever I change something on my color, it has to be auto trigger my render function again. So let's see how we can do that. In order to create a sensitive data variable, okay, I need a concept called state. Now, state is something very important in React. And you know what? There are only two fundamentals of learning React: props and React. We'll talk about props later. So let's talk about state. Now, when this, imagine a state is a state of your mind. Okay. And the way is your state of is your mind, and it's how you behave. It's similarly, the state of a component decides what should be shown or should be hidden on the UI. So the way you create a state is very simple. You say this whenever I say this inside my component, this always points to the React component that I'm creating. In my case, this is always wall. Okay, so this is always wall. I'm creating a state for this component. So I say this dot state equal to, and this state is a must object. Okay, remember we created a person object, and this state is also an object. And inside the state object, I can create any number of my variables. So inside in here, I create my variable called color, and I call it as red in here. Okay. And then what I do is I don't want a variable that is outside, which is insensitive to the changes. I want my variable to be sensitive. So anytime the variable changes, my render should be triggered. So this is my special variable, which is not a literal JavaScript, the plain vanilla var variable. This is a state variable. Anytime a state changes in React, your component will auto render. Okay. So I do this, comment this guys out, and instead of color, now where is my color? Now my color is no longer outside the component. I cannot literally tell color in here, because that will throw me an error saying color is not defined, because color is not outside the state, it's inside the state. And the way I get the variable inside the state is using this, which is again my variable, which is my component in here, dot state. As simple as that. So my component is inside the state, my variable is inside the state. So this dot state dot color. Sounds good? And give it a refresh. And you should see my color is red. I'm reading the variable value from a state. Now, see what happens. If I have to change my color, a different value, how do I do that? How do I change a property inside an object, Arjun? Remember, we were trying to do something like this: name is equal to person.name. And I said this dot. Can I do this line? This dot state dot color is equal to blue.
Yeah.
Does that work? Right?
Yeah, it works.
Yeah, this dot state dot color, because I'm telling this dot state dot color in here, right? And give it a refresh, and let's change it to blue. Right, folks? Am I clear until here?
Yeah.
Manoj, Hana, Karthik, Vivek, do I have to repeat? Do I have to repeat, guys? Do I have to repeat? Say yes, no. I need an extra sensitive variable where any change happens to that variable, my render should be auto trigger. Okay, and let's do this on the ComponentDidMount as well. This dot state dot color, and I said anytime okay, so let me go back here and put back my console logs and see what's going on my console log. Okay, so the whole reason of bringing me state in here is because after the ComponentDidMount, my render should be called again, and that should update the UI. And you see, it's not doing it for me. And you know what? For writing this single line of code, this dot state dot color is equal to blue, one of my colleagues lost his job. Right away, in a third day of his job, he wrote this line of code, just one line of code in React, and he lost his job. He was reviewed by one of the lead developers, and immediately he terminated from the job. Can you believe that? And this is how terrific this is in React world is. You will never, ever, ever directly change the state variable like this. This is not a regular object, like like a person object, like a regular object. This is a very special object, and in order to do a special object, if it's a special object, you have to handle it specially. And the special way of doing is, instead of directly mutating the state, you do something like this. This dot set the state. You set the state, set state, and set state is a function. And right now your state is this, right? And I want my state to be something else. So I want my state to be, instead of red, I want my state to be blue. And same goes, and same goes here. Instead of my state in here, I want my state to be green. I'm using a special function called a set state. You are not supposed to mutate the state directly. You have to use this function. And there is a reason behind this. We will discuss in tomorrow's class. You set state and then give it a save, and you should see something happening very interesting on the UI. Your constructor is called first, your ComponentWillMount is called second, your render is called third, and the ComponentDidMount is called fourth, which is good until this far. But again, look what happens on this is the render is called again, right? And that's where it updates my UI to green. Any questions on set state?
Vikram, could you also console log the color during each method? Is it changing from?
Right, I can do that. So let's do that. This dot state dot color. Okay, right in here. And then I can go here, do here. And then I can go here and do here. And right in here. Okay, and see my first constructor has a red color in it. The second ComponentWillMount has a red color in here. It's supposed to be green, but I'll tell you why is it red in here. And then finally, I have my color, which is blue in here, which is after the component will mount, and then the render function is blue, and the component did mount is blue because I'm console logging before the state change happens, and then finally the render function is triggering the green color. It's a little confusing at the beginning, but this is how it works. Anytime you do a set state, a render function is auto triggered. And guys, if you take a closer look, Vikram, you keep telling anytime a set state happens, your render function will be auto trigger. But after the component will mount, your set stating in here, it should auto trigger the render function, right? And so it does, right? And this happens for two reasons. One, immediately after the component will mount, what is the next function that it has to call? Render, right? It doesn't have to explicitly call it. Anytime you do a set state, render is obviously called. That's the first reason. The second reason is that component will mount, after the component will mount, it definitely have to go to render. And it's not calling twice. Look at that, for two different reasons. In the same order, it has to call the render, but in order to do the set state, you're also calling the render, but you're not looking console logs the render two times. It's just a one time, because when you do a set state inside the component will mount, render will not be called, for the reason because the next immediate component lifecycle is render. So there's no reason for me to call the render again. This is another interview question. Does the render function is called when I do a set state inside the component will mount? And guys, 10 out of 10 interviewers ask this component lifecycle. Can you tell me about a component lifecycle in React? And I start telling it like this. Every component in React undergoes three phases: initialization phase, updating phase, unmounting phase. The initialization phase, I have a constructor where I set the initial state of the component. After constructor, I have a component will mount where I get a second chance to set the state of the component. After component will mount, I have a render function which actually returns a view which is shown on the UI. And after the render function, I have a component did mount, which gives me another chance to set the state of the component. Now, my question to you guys, can I do a set state inside the render? Can I do a set state inside the render?
Will that be like
No,
a
it will be
forever
auto
going
repeated.
loop?
Yeah.
Hannah, you there? Are you following, Hannah?
Yeah, I'm here.
Okay, can I do a set state? I know Arjun and Karthik have already. Can I do a set state inside my render function? So Arjun and Karthik were right. If I do a set state inside the function,
Keep on looping.
it will keep on going, and it will, the browser will crash at me and yell at me saying that, are you mad? What are you trying to do? Render, 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 render. Because render happens, it calls the set state, and the set state calls the render again. When the render happens, and the set state again. See what happens. And it will reach to a point, the browser will tell, I can no longer handle this. I'm crashing. Maximum update the depth executed. This can happen when a component repeatedly calls set state inside will go on this component life cycles. And React limits the number of nested updates to prevent infinite loops. Prior to, I think it's React 15 or React 14, I believe. No, there wasn't a React 14 version. Your browser would just crash. Now they have started limiting how many times the set state should happen, and then showing this little message. You cannot do a set state inside a render, because setting a set state inside a render will trigger the render and the set state and the render and the set state and the render and the set state. Okay, folks? Okay, it's not even calling the render in the first place. It's supposed to. There you go. It called 52 times the render function and then failed. So it's another interview question. Can you do a set state inside the render function? No, you cannot do a set state inside a render function. That is against, or even not, it's not even an anti-pattern. It does not even let you do a set state inside a render function. I'll break in here for any questions, and let me know if you have any questions for today's class.